Okay. Super. So you're very welcome to this week's Thursday, a Thriving Thursday. We're very happy to have Dr. George Simons with us this week, who, as you'll see in a minute, is sitting with a beautiful backdrop of waves and wind, and making me feel that I'm developing a stronger and stronger sense of cabin fever here. George Simons, I know most of you know again, but I'll do a very brief introduction to him. So George is the creator and founder of the award-winning Diversity Intercultural Games series. And I know most of us who are working in the intercultural field also work with his materials. As well as that, he is a trainer, consultant, lecturer, particularly in the fields of diversity, intercultural communication, and also negotiation. So George, I would say a very warm welcome to you. It looks very warm from your background. Could you just tell us how you are, where you are, and how you're currently coping with the trying conditions we have at the minute?
Well, I'm at home and I work from my home office. Normally I have 3 or 4 interns working with me here, resident here. Everybody went home, so I'm all by myself with a lot of empty beds. And on the other hand, it's very interesting. I'm an old guy. I'm 82 years old, which means I grew up I was born into the Depression and grew into World War II, and in those experiences spent a lot of time by myself being creative. So I have to say that the lockup or the lockdown, whatever they want to call it, is not really very oppressive for me. The other nice advantage is I live in an apartment. I'm in the south of France, in a little town which is about 20 minutes by bicycle from Cannes, where the film festival ought to be this year, but probably will not be. And anyway, I love living here, and one of the nice things about my apartment, it has lots of green space around it, so I can go out and do a trot and do my calisthenics in the woods and things of that sort. So I'm coping quite well, and I'm really feeling badly because what I'm hearing is a lot of pain on the part of people I know, and difficulties and challenges and fears particularly. I'm particularly overwhelmed with something maybe we can get into this part of the discussion, and that is that we all know that over the past couple of years, populism has been growing enormously in Europe and elsewhere. And that populism all of a sudden now with the virus has put us into what we all know theoretically, but we can see happening right now, which is really scary, is that when we are stressed, we move back into our cultural messages that are survival messages. And these quickly throw us into us and them categories. And this is particularly accentuated now because of the virus and the political context of that. The Americans are blaming the Chinese are blaming the Americans. If you happen to have an Asiatic face, you may be getting all kinds of guff on the street if you go shopping and so on, because of the bias has been elevated all over around us. And this is one of the reasons why I feel this is in the coming months and perhaps even years, one of the major challenges that we as interculturalists are going to have to take on. And I realize that a lot of us have been either intercultural teachers in the university or intercultural consultants to business and how to get on in business. But I think we need to broaden our social consciousness and our political consciousness and address the issues that are really hurting in our world today because of our survival tendency to cluster together for some kind of warmth, which is a good thing, but also for some kind of exclusion, which is a very painful thing.
George, this is really one of the reasons why at SIETAR Austria we decided to introduce this Thriving Thursdays series in order to rethink and reevaluate the sorts of trainings, the sorts of skills, competences that as interculturalists we promote. Because exactly as you said, you know, we have this increased sort of and constant development of new biases. We have problems with populism all across the globe, really. How do you see we can best, manage, or how can we contribute to improving the situation in some way?
Well, first of all, I think we have to really upgrade our skills for online communication. I say that because all of a sudden we were thrust into no gatherings, it's all got to be online, whether it's work or play or education or whatever. All of a sudden, if we had not been prepared for this, we have to pick it up very quickly. For example, you know, we have been selling these wonderful diversity games, which I hope some of you use, these card sets for different cultures and different cultural issues. But the thing that we suddenly had to do was, like, overnight, turn them into an online version. And temporarily, we were creating all the games into PowerPoints that can be used online. We also have a collaboration with the university in the Netherlands, which is trying to create an app which will be a little more elegant than just the PowerPoint slides. Mm-hmm. But that has been a great success. I mean, while we're doing this right now, my colleague Teresa Mroczek is doing a program for SIETAR Poland, in which she's going to be playing cultural competence online. And the few times that we've done this, it's been surprisingly successful. We were scared of it at the first. So I guess what I'm saying, I'm not flogging my product as much as I'm saying is, how can you learn enough to do what you do well face to face and do it as well or as good as you can or better online? Mm-hmm. I feel that may be much more threatening future. I mean, people going back to work are not going to be the same for months and months at least. We don't know. And universities, schools, if people are successfully working online, they're going to be asking themselves questions about, well, maybe we should do a lot more of this instead of paying for dormitories, classrooms, and offices. And so I think we as interculturalists need to raise the question about, what do we see as the story that leads us into the future? Some of you are familiar with Lyotard, the French sociologist who brought up the idea of the meta-receit, the meta-narratives that we live by, and raises the question of how we create reality culturally by a story which is supposed to explain it. And the point being is that we're the creators of those stories. They can be recreated and changed, but the problem is we need to be conscious of them. For example, the economic system, which is having a real bad time at the moment, is a creation of what, 300-400 years ago in its development. There can be other stories about how humans work together. Most people are talking about, when will we get back to normal? I think the question is, how do we want to define the new normal?
The new normal. Mm-hmm.
And this is an intense intercultural and cultural question, because it has to do with how we construct the stories that we live by, how we share them, how we act them out. And this is where, and also what we're learning about brain science now will contribute to how we manage that as well. Mm-hmm. So to me, those are the challenges that lie in front of us as interculturalists. Okay, we have to make a living. Okay, we need a salary from somebody or clients and so on. But what we're doing even in our assigned roles, needs to be done with at least the addition of the raising of consciousness of what are the stories that we want to live by as a society, as an organization, as a university, and so on. This is culture under construction is what we should be thinking about, rather than how can we get rid of this bug and get back to the normal. What this is also very clearly brought to the fore is the various ways in which culture is dealing with the virus, but also in the background, the surging issues of ecology. There was a picture of the pangolin that somebody sent around. There's lots of humor going around about this sort of thing, but what's going on was suggested. The pangolin was almost made extinct by hunting and so on, but now he's getting even. So,
yeah. So
I don't want to be too, one of the terrible things about getting older is that you may tend to be pessimistic, So I always ask my friends, am I right or am I just getting older? And the answer I hope for is both.
Both, exactly. No, well, I mean, I don't see what you've said in any way as being not positive. You mentioned this idea of humor as well, George. How important is humor? And I know this is something that we say, okay, partly doesn't translate across various cultural boundaries. But how important is humor also from, the perspective of, the brain and, brain science?
Well, I wish I could tell you in 5 minutes, but the interesting, I had a project with the university in Bourgogne, Dijon, this past year, and they developed a diversity game on humor across cultures. And the real challenge here, of course, is that this is such a sensitive topic. And we have all kinds of things from a very strict, what do we want to call it, political correctness, which says don't have any fun at all. And then we know that there's an underground where everybody shares their jokes that they wouldn't dare tell the people they don't know with the people that they know well.
Yeah.
So I think what we're seeing is an explosion of humor and satire and all that other sort of stuff. And I think this is, to me, humor and religion have been two things that interculturalists have unfortunately avoided because of conflict resistance, conflict avoidance. We don't want to deal with touchy issues. And the fact is, if you don't deal with touchy issues, they run the show.
Yeah.
Yeah. So that's my thought, at least about humor. I love good humor, and I have my little network of people who get my emails with the best jokes I find. I won't report me to the political police.
So, George, are you planning a new series then about consciousness in COVID times?
You mean in humor?
In terms of diversity, in terms of your,
Well, actually, I'm always open to new ideas, and one of our authors jumped on it, and she's working with 3 students, I think in Stuttgart, to create a game on how we will greet and manage each other in the times of social distance. Okay, and how it's going to be about greetings across cultures and then adaptations of greetings about cultures. So I'm looking forward to seeing what they're going to do with that.
Sorry, George, for interrupting. Thank you. Just before I maybe ask a last question, and then I do want to hand over this week a little bit earlier to our audience so that they also get to engage with you. So please either write your questions in the chat or the question and answers forum. I will also unmute you if I can in the short breaks that we have in between. So please, yeah, already you can start typing in any questions that you have for George, or comments or anything you would like him to talk a little bit more on. So George, you were talking about also this, the social distancing essentially. How do you feel about the term? There's a lot of, different feelings about, you know, how appropriate or inappropriate the use of this term social distancing is. Do you have any issues with it, or?
Well, you know, the vocabulary is made up on the fly because these things happen so fast to us. Mm-hmm. My sense of it is that, you know, we are inclined to measure our social distance culturally as well. Mm-hmm. Social distance around here in France is about 1.5 meters if people don't really pay attention to it and go further. Mm-hmm. And we have discovered that actually the virus travels about 3 meters rather than 2. So how we manage this thing going forward, I have no idea. Lots of people are planning different kinds of arrangements for space in restaurants and gyms and all that other sort of stuff. The main issue for me here is how can we have intense, empathetic, mm-hmm. attentive human connection with each other? Mm-hmm. Now, I'm looking at your picture on my screen and you're looking at my picture on your screen, and we know each other already. Mm-hmm. Okay, we've been friends for a number of years already. So continuing the connection is something, but we have not yet explored what are the tools, the prerequisites, the approaches to actually creating connections mm-hmm. That are meaningful, both with the social distance and with the online existence that has taken a lot of us. The other thing I've noticed, and this is not exactly this, but all of a sudden, being locked down, I can't tell you how many things I haven't paid attention to in my house, outside, on the lawn, in the garden. I take a walk, and all of a sudden I see things they've always been there, but they just utterly fascinate me now. I mean, there's a little wooded area behind my apartment, and I take a walk out there every day and notice how the plants change and grow and which ones I can eat, you know. There's mint back there, and there's, I don't know, what do you call them, Brennnessel in German? I don't know.
Yeah.
Ortie and burning nettles or something like that, yeah.
Nettles, they're called nettles, yeah.
Mm-hmm. So life has become much richer in immediate surroundings, okay? Mm-hmm. I'm noticing a lot more. Maybe some of you are doing that as well.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, no, I definitely agree. I think everybody is becoming a little bit more observant and a little bit more conscious of what's around them. We have a question from Matthew Hill, and I'm going to try and, if I can, manage to give Matthew the microphone, but he would like to know, I'll just read the question to you and then try and get Matthew here. Yeah, so are we now facing our privilege? Are we now facing our privilege as a new way? Mm-hmm.
That's a good question, and it's something I have been reflecting on. First of all, I'm not hurting like so many, you know, we're talking about 30 million people out of work. Mm-hmm. No pay, no way, you know, I sold my house in the US, I have a little money in the bank, so I'm okay, and I feel terribly privileged. And then I start hearing about friends and what's happening to them, and you know, how it's costing them their well-being, not because they've contracted the virus, but because the virus has contracted the world around them. So it'd be interesting to hear what Matt feels like about this, but I feel terribly privileged. And, you know, I told you, I think earlier, I grew up in the Depression and the war. In the Depression, my dad knew how to go out in the woods and bring back enough to make a gourmet meal. And, those are skills I don't have, and they're skills that not many people can advertise if they're in an urban environment. So enough said. Maybe Matt has a comment about that, how he feels about it.
No, exactly. So you have that extreme. Can you hear me? Is that okay?
Yes, yeah,
Yep.
we can perfectly.
Exactly. Oh no, just thinking it from our spoilt intercultural trainer vibe, how we used to, if I had too many flights, I got bored with airports. What a complete and utter luxury that was. So we have the social extreme of unemployed and recession and depression, but just on a basic level, what a privilege staying in a hotel, meeting a nice bunch of people in a classroom. So the everyday, and that becomes a richer nostalgia. And then your idea of just appreciating a nettle, you just appreciate that what became very ordinary, which of course, compared with the history of humanity, was incredibly special. So we can value it now.
Yeah, yeah. I mean, I've got some good recipes for the nettles too. So.
I mean, maybe I could also add to that, and George, maybe you could think about it from a diversity perspective. I mean, I think we're also moving forward into a society where the digital gap, the diversity in that sense, is going to have a huge impact on people involved in education, business, and all walks of life.
Well, when we started doing virtual teams about 25 years ago, I was working for Management Center Europe, and we developed one of the first courses on virtual teamwork. And one of the things that immediately came to the fore was the fact that not all people's computers were equal. And what we're discovering today in the educational system is that there are some people who have fast internet and high quality stuff, and other people who don't even have it, And these people were shoulder to shoulder in the same classroom, but now all of a sudden the cultural class economy gaps are showing up. And what I'm concerned about is if this goes on significantly longer, is the level of violence that's going to start to occur. And this is why reducing fear and reducing the us versus them attitudes, to me, is such an important mission on the part of us who call ourselves interculturalists.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. Okay, thank you. Tamara, would you like to join us? You also have a question about intercultural competences?
Yes, can you hear me?
Yeah, perfectly. Thank you.
Hello, Mr. Simons. So my question is, what specific intercultural competencies do you think serve particularly well currently? And which of these competencies are actually proving or will prove particularly important in the future? You can also refer on what you talked before about unconscious bias, how we can actually become aware of it with which competencies and how to develop it exactly.
Good question, Tamara. There's an awful lot that could be said about this, but what I would like to focus on, and this makes me a renegade, I suppose, I absolutely hate the term unconscious bias. And my reason for that is that it's a normal function of the human mind to create, and here I use a different author who calls them frames. When something happens, we get a picture in a frame, okay? If we say unconscious bias, well, unconscious means it's sourced in the unconscious, but we start using the word bias, it sounds like an accusation, and this is what I don't like about it. I have frames that I apply to whatever situations come along, okay? Images, they're rich images and sounds and so on that come from my cultural story that I'm trying to apply to understand what's happening about me. And these do need to be challenged with new information and so on. But I definitely am not a fan of talking about the thing as unconscious bias. We do need to develop, both our own and with the people we work with, the tools for empathy, for understanding how their minds and their feelings work. We do need, I think, to carefully analyze, and this is, I see more and more stuff coming out about this, is how cultures have been reacting to what's going on in the virus. I'm a U.S. American by background, even though I've lived in Europe half my life, and I've lived in France for 25 years now. But I look at the news of what's going on in the United States, and I'm just absolutely terrified about what's happening there in terms of, if I look at U.S. core values as I have become used to defining them. There's an old Latin saying which is something like, I won't go for the Latin, but when you take something good to an extreme, it becomes something very bad and sometimes evil. And I'm looking at a lot of the US values expressed in extremes under the stress of what's going on. Now, I don't think the United States is exclusive about that, but it speaks to the management and mismanagement of the virus and the health system and the government system in the United States. And each of you can look at how your own culture or your own country has managed and used its values to do what it feels like it needs to do in the face of this threat. So I think the analysis of how culture looks, Mae Gwynn's new book, of course, is a real masterpiece about this, but she's pointed out that you change the context and how the culture expresses its value changes. Mm-hmm. And so in the extreme, you get basic cultural values expressing themselves, and sometimes to the extreme. The best becomes the worst in us.
George, that sort of reminded me also of this idea of where we're getting our knowledge and information from at the minute, and which sources we use, and how they also impact the sorts of stories actually that we're party to or we're receiving. I mean, how do you see, or how do you recommend we manage our intake of stories at the minute, of information at the minute?
Yeah, I think that's a very complex question, in the sense that what I find is that the polarization in my own native country, the United States, there are, one media and another medium, the right and the left are totally opposed, okay? And people only listen to one side. And I think careful conversations with people who have I just had somebody who was staying here for a while, and they're convinced that this whole thing is a hoax. It's Bill Gates and the political people and the people with money going to reduce the population and make big money off of what's going on, okay? So, the kind of conspiracy theories that people are generating out of their slant on the media and so on. We are at a point where we are just flooded with information. And people are, of course, filling Facebook with this stuff, filling the other social networks with this stuff. How to help people see the facts without the political machinations and interpretations is going to be one ongoing problem. And these are all, the political is also part of the cultural reality that we need to deal with. Mm-hmm. I feel like I'm saying blah, 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 and some of you should all know this, but where we're going from here, check back with me in a year or two.
In a year or two.
I don't know.
Okay. Yeah, well, we definitely will check back with you in a year or two. That would be wonderful. I'm not sure if we have a last question from the audience. We've hit our time. Does anybody have a burning last question that they would like to ask? If you do, you can just unmute yourself. Yeah, please, Vincent, go ahead. We'd love to hear from you. So I'll try and unmute you. Yeah, we should be able to hear you, Vincent.
I hear Vincent every day.
Vincent, your hand is raised and your microphone is on, but I'm afraid I can't hear anything. Unless you'd like to write your question into the question and answers. Maybe we have it in the chat. Sorry, just a second. That's hidden. No, I just have a link that is being sent, I think, by Vincent. I'll have a look at that afterwards, but as far as I see, there are no comments there. Okay, maybe just then, if Vincent manages to unmute himself, we'll be delighted to have him. Otherwise, George, so I think we got caught up in this question as well about, as you say, framing, or as Tamara asked, in terms of biases, but in terms of other competences, maybe just which competences do you think, as well as obviously intentionality and sort of consciousness in our own communication, is there anything else that you think that will become increasingly important over the coming weeks, months, and years, maybe?
I would say patience.
Patience.
Patience. In other words, I think we need to have ways of making sure that we are not stressed and we don't pass the stress on to other people.
Mm-hmm.
But we're patient with people as well as with ourselves. We are curious, and we get people to tell their story and not just their opinion.
Mm-hmm.
Because storytelling is a big deal. We're doing this gamification week next week for SIETAR Italy, and I'm doing some stuff, and most of you know Joanna Sell, who will be doing use of storytelling in intercultural work. And this is something that I think has sort of descended upon us as the realization that stories are incredibly important. And I don't want to oppose stories to facts,
Mm-hmm.
but we need to build facts into our stories, at least into our analysis of our own stories. So we need to be telling stories, and we need to be listening to stories and encouraging others to tell the stories to us.
Mm-hmm.
I'm here now.
Oh,
me?
Vincent, you're here, so we can. Well, this is good. So we can. We're no problem. We're over the time, but we can. I think we can take your question, comment briefly before we finish off.
Yeah, I'm sorry that I couldn't connect first. I had a problem anyway, and the microphone and everything. No, I was asking to George. We are now in an abnormal situation. Okay, we need to create the new normal. I think we all agree about that. What kind of paradigm shift do you see, George? Not so much the norms and practices, but like in the values, and not so much the greeting that may change, but do you see any paradigm shift in values? So on a higher level?
I think you've raised the question, which is, I would love to see a big brainstorming recognition of what are the meta-narratives we've been living by, and what elements would we like to see in the new narrative, the new normal, if you want to call it that. Just a second here. That's Christine with my groceries.
These are the joys of webinars and virtual work, is that exactly that.
Family, huh?
You can, exactly. No amount of "don't disturb me" signs work.
Good old
Okay.
Christine, yeah.
Yes, this is live, Matthew. So
I think that's Christine anyway. She was going shopping and doing some stuff, so she rang twice.
Okay.
Oh, well, come say hello. Christine, those of you who know Christine.
Well,
the math.
We all know her.
We'll all know her in a minute.
And she's the secretary of SIETAR Europa.
Okay.
Yes.
With the mask on.
Christine.
Yeah.
It's lovely of you to join us. You have to come a little bit closer to the screen. Yeah, perfect.
Yeah,
So,
it's a nice picture. Yeah.
Hello,
yeah,
hello, Christine.
perfect. Hello.
Hi, Vincent. Yeah, how are you?
Salut, Christine. Salut.
Salut.
So I think this is the perfect opportunity. Thank you for Christine for coming and saying hello, for us to finish off. I always promise we'll keep it to 30 minutes. We're on 36. We don't quite manage. George will, or Christine, either or both of you will leave you with the last, or maybe you would like to leave us with the last couple of words of wisdom.
Yes,
How can we continue to thrive through these times?
I'd like everybody to know how to pronounce your name, Enya.
Enya, wonderful. I think that's good. That's perfect.
Thank you for the opportunity and be well.
Okay, on that note, yeah, I'll say thank you very much. Thanks again for joining us, and I'll hopefully see you again over the coming weeks for the rest of our Thriving Thursdays series. Thank you, George.
Okay,
Thank you,
take care.
Christina.
Thanks,
Okay,
everybody. Have a
thank
good
you.
night.
Bye.
Bye-bye. Good
Bye-bye.
evening.
Thank
Thank
you.
you. Okay, George.